Zzap 64 handed out sizzlers, silver medals and gold medals to the games it considered the very best. But what about the other end of the scale? Welcome to the entirely unofficial Zzap 64 Wooden Spoon Awards, as we count down from the 20 lowest scoring Commodore 64 games ever reviewed in the magazine. From a miserable 10% all the way down to just 3%. Some of these scores were thoroughly deserved, others were probably a bit harsh, and I'll be defending a few childhood favourites, maybe. Well, I'll play them so you don't have to. But this isn't about me. Did Zzap get them right? Let's begin at number 20. We begin at number 20 with Speed Zone, published by Mastertronic in 1989 and credited to developer Silicon Design. As far as the available records show, this appears to have been their only credited game, which, after playing it, may be for the best. You're sent into a Bermuda Triangle-style space anomaly to collect a missing freighter, but any intrigue ends once the game begins. Tiny enemies fly around at ridiculous speed, while you fire largely aimless shots and struggle to work out what is happening. What the feck? This is just impossible, and definitely not fun. Zzap criticised the awful graphics, near-absent sound, and thoroughly unconvincing gameplay, handing it just 10%. I'd give it more like 5% to be fair. Thankfully, directly above it was the superb Heavy Metal Paradroid, earning a 97% silver medal. That gets a fuller look in my complete Zzap 64 1989 awards video, elsewhere on the channel. At number 19 is Artura, released by Gremlin Graphics and developed by Sentient Software. Seeing Gremlin attached to a score this low is surprising, as they were recognisable for plenty of superb games, and this even had music from the great Ben Daglish. Sadly, not even his wizardry could save it. You're in a sort of strange castle collecting rooms, even though they look like petrol cans, while battling soldiers, rats and what appears to be flying chickens. The jerky movement, crappy backgrounds and repetitive action, as well as numerous bugs, make exploring the game unpleasant. Crap, I picked up health, which means I have to endure this game even longer. How can you tell where the doors are? Not these ones you can see, these strange ones you can enter by pulling down on the joystick. Who's this guy? And why does he keep appearing then running off, and then reappearing as his twin brother? Finally, I fell into a pit, which has left me trapped with no way out, which says plenty about how finished the game felt. At least, I can be nibbled to death by rats and spiders for some reason. Sentient Software also developed How to Be a Complete Bastard. Artura, meanwhile, was proving to be a complete bastard to play. And just to add insult to injury to this page of Zzap, Roy of the Rovers managed only 18%. At number 18 is Rogue, released at budget price by Mastertronic in 1988, not to be confused with the superb Rogue 64. This Commodore 64 conversion was produced by the Front Room team and Icon Design, with PD Marshall credited as its creator, which says nothing as he also coded Super Trolley, and that was also Bobbins. The mission is to explore the dungeons, gather weapons, armour, food and scrolls, and eventually recover the Amulet of Yendor. Zzap hated the jerky scrolling, awkward cursor controls, crude graphics and almost non-existent sound, awarding it just 10%. Personally, I think that was a little harsh though, due to the legacy of this game, and I'm sure some of you love it. Yes, this version is slow, clumsy and reportedly riddled with bugs, but underneath those problems is still an okay dungeon crawler, but it's definitely not in the same league as, say, Sword of Forgoal. iExtra also struggled in this issue with just 13%, but it wasn't quite crap enough for this video. What do you think? Was Zzap right to punish a poor conversion, or did Rogue deserve considerably more than 10%? At number 17 is Crazy Paving, a £1.99 budget release published by Top 10 in 1988 and written by Ken Smith. Although I'm still convinced that doesn't even say Crazy Paving, whereas the whole bit's in the A's. Anyway, you control Howard the robot, who supposedly needs to repair 4 gardens by laying 60 paving slabs while searching for keys and avoiding spiders, bees, rollers and other wandering oddities. It may not sound too dreadful, but everything happens at such a sluggish pace that even laying virtual paving starts to feel like unpaid labour, and I have no idea what any of these icons or objects even are. Zzap called it tedious, bland, and almost completely devoid of lasting appeal. The sound received just 8%, lastability fell to 4%, and the final verdict was a miserable 10%. But how could they even dream of putting the awesome Bruce Lee, winner of a 92% silver medal, on the same page as this load of nonsense? That page contained both ends of the Zzap 64 scale. At number 16 is Werner, Mach, a full-priced Artura release developed by Micro Partner and originally released in 1986. It was based on Werner, the hugely popular German comic character created by Rutger Feldman, better known as Broschel. Personally, I'd never heard of it at all. You'd think Werner could have been a decent adventure, but it just serves up a collection of confusing minigames involving assembling a motorbike, driving to a party, and even playing dice. The instructions were almost incomprehensible. The loading was painfully slow, and most sections offered very little actual gameplay. I didn't have the foggiest idea what was going on. Zzap admitted that the large, colourful graphics looked reasonable, but awarded just 8% for lastability, 3% for value, and 10% overall. Describing the whole thing as original but pointless. Werner may have been a major comic star in Germany, but this licensed effort ran out of petrol before the bike had even been assembled. At number 15 is Boing, reviewed as a £2.99 high-power budget release, although it was originally published by E&J Software in 1989. Rather mysteriously, the cassette box proudly displays an 82% review score from Your Commodore. Quite what version they played is anyone's guess, because Zzap would eventually score it 73% points lower. There were quite a few Commodore 64 games called Boing, including the Bubble Bus release from 1986, but this is the one starring Boris the Big Ball. The title promises plenty of boinging, yet Boris barely gets off the ground, and some of his bouncing appears to have been programmed by somebody working from a vague description of gravity. The platforms are not much help either, because some of them fail to appear until you are already dropping past them. At that point, avoiding death becomes less of a skill and more of a miracle. It's awkward, unfair, and quite frankly, a load of bollocks. The idea resembles Bounder viewed from the side, and there may have been a decent game hiding underneath it all. Unfortunately, the controls are painfully awkward, the difficulty is ridiculous, and I struggle to survive the opening section regardless of which level I selected. Zzap described it as one of the hardest and most irritating games they had encountered, and awarded it just 9%. Personally, I'd much rather play Cauldron 2, which was slightly less annoying, but only slightly. At number 14 is Turbo Esprit, originally released by Durell Software in 1986 and written by Mike Richardson, before returning here as a £1.99 Encore re-release. I first played this at a mate's house on the Spectrum, and genuinely enjoyed racing around the city, tracking down drug dealers and causing a bit of mayhem. When I eventually found the Commodore 64 version, however, it was complete bobbins by comparison. There are no sound effects, the controls lag behind you, and the car never really feels as though it is moving. Instead, it looks as if the buildings have been placed on a conveyor belt and slowly dragged past. The roads are practically deserted, with no cars at all on the left-hand side, while the occasional people drifting past look like rejected ghosts from Ghostbusters. Turning the car directly into the wall was probably the most entertaining thing I managed to do, mainly because it briefly stopped the scenery from pretending this was a driving game. Zzap found the graphics and sound equally miserable, and handed it just 9%. Frankly, you would have more fun with the Tommy Turning Turbo dashboard from 1983. And that didn't even need a Commodore 64. This is a load of crap. Oh, and there's no sound, but you can make the car piss this noise in front of it. I'm presuming that's your gun, but it's not very effective when there's nothing to shoot. At number 13 is Trigger Happy, released by CRL in 1988, with programming and graphics by Jeff Lee and music from Jay Derritt. It was also the sequel to Thundercross, which had already managed the fairly dreadful 16% from Zzap. This horizontally scrolling shoot-em-up puts you inside a large armoured capsule, blasting ground targets while managing a shield that can be lowered to fire. Unfortunately, you can't move while shooting. The ship takes up far too much of the screen, and the slow, jerky scrolling soon becomes tedious. Zzap thought it was even worse than its predecessor and awarded it just 9%. It shared the spread with Road Wars, which only received 19%, while Laser Tag stumbled to 22% elsewhere in the issue. Do you agree with Zzap, or have we finally found somebody willing to defend Trigger Happy? At number 12 is Inspector Gadget and the Circus of Fear, published by Melbourne House in 1987 and developed by Binary Design. A cartoon license packed with gadgets, villains and memorable characters should have given them plenty to work with. Instead, we get a circus where seals and lions roam around freely, for reasons nobody bothers to explain. Gadget must collect equipment, identify 6 disguised mad agents and rescue Penny, but simply moving around is hazardous. Brush against an animal and you are thrown back to the previous screen. Touch almost anything else and Gadget gets zapped before you have worked out what happened. Then there is this princess, or whatever she is, standing motionless on the right-hand side of the screen. Is she waiting to be rescued? Is she an enemy? Who knows? Touch her once and you are zapped for no reason whatsoever. Zzap criticised the dreadful collision detection, enemies attacking from half a screen away, walls you could sometimes walk through, and hits that give you virtually no warning. The familiar theme tune earned a little praise, but the game surrounding it is confusing, unfair, and barely explained. It finished with 9%, and after playing it myself, I'm not going to argue. I spent most of my time wondering why I had been zapped, where I had been sent, and what any of these circus animals were doing there. And somehow, this was not even the lowest scoring game on the page. We will be returning to that little embarrassment later. At number 11 is Groovy Garden, published by Central Solutions and programmed by G. Bolton, with graphic credited to J. Bolton. Most databases date it to 1985, although some list it to 1986, which is already more mystery than the game deserves. Your job is to grow 4 trees while defending them from mutant vegetables, using something called an Agent Orange dispenser. You also have a faith meter to watch, while Old Joe occasionally walks up and restores the garden with his green finger. It sounds odd enough to be interesting, but Zzap found it ugly, frustrating, and almost unplayable. The sound and lastability both received 8%, with the final score settling at just 9%. They even suggested a blank tape offered better value than the £1.99 asking price. Was Zzap right about this one, or is 9% a little too brutal for a simple budget shooter? At number 10 is Neutral Zone, originally released by Access Software in 1983, programmed by company founder Bruce Carver, and reviewed here as a £2.99 Americana re-release. You defend the planet Alpha 4 by rotating a weapons pod around your base, and shooting alien craft as they approach. It's basic and repetitive, but there is an early attempt at a 3D style perspective, and the action becomes considerably busier once you reach the later levels. I don't think I have disagreed with a Zzap review more than this one. Neutral Zone is hardly the final word in shoot-em-ups, and there was certainly room for improvement, but 9% was probably a bit harsh. This was made in 1983, during the C64's earliest commercial years, by the man who would help give the machine Beachhead, made over Moscow, and Leaderboard. By the time Zzap reviewed this budget re-release, Bruce Carver had already become an important figure in the C64's history, yet they judged his first game as though it had arrived alongside the much more advanced releases of 1986. I bought the budget tape myself in 1985 and had some fun with it. I never regarded it as a masterpiece, but I certainly never felt robbed either. Nostalgia may be helping it slightly, but I would give it around 6 out of 10, not 9%. The same issue gave the infamous World Cup Carnival 11%, which only makes this score harder to understand. So, am I allowing nostalgia to interfere here, or did Zzap give Neutral Zone one of its most unfair ratings? At number 9 is One Bite Too Deep, published by Relax Games in 1985. You play Oscar, searching a cliff, courtyard and research station for 5 objects needed to defeat an evil master and his blood-sucking servants. The graphics are certainly memorable, although perhaps not for the intended reason. With all these reds, purples and strange twisting shapes, parts of it resemble the entrails of someone's stomach after a heavy night on the beer. The game is divided into 3 stages, but there is barely enough action here to fill one. Most of my time was spent wandering around, collecting objects, getting lost in this maze, and repeatedly fending off the same enormous bat, which respawns every few seconds and irritated me to death. There is almost no sound, the gameplay is painfully simple, and when you finally die, the game informed me that I was the loser. I can't speak for Oscar, but I wasn't feeling particularly loose at the time. At £7.95, this was being sold as a full-price game rather than an odd little budget release, which makes the lack of substance much harder to forgive. It's unusual enough to be a curiosity, but there is no way this should have been sitting on the shelves at full price. Zzap awarded it 9%, and on this occasion, I can't put up much of an argument. More unsettlingly, the same issue gave Friday the 13th just 13%, which I still strongly disagree with. There is a full deep dive into that game elsewhere on the channel, where I give it far more credit than Zzap ever did. At number 8 is Cops and Robbers, released by Atlantis Software and reviewed here on the £2.99 Atlantis Gold label. You play Lightfingers Lonergan, robbing the Acme Diamond Company and loading the gems into your car. You can crack a safe, ride lifts, explore a dark mine, blow things up with TNT and even break into the police station to rescue a prisoner. There are ghosts in the mine as well. Touch one and an ambulance immediately arrives to take you to the morgue, which is impressive considering the police spend most of their time sliding around without moving their arms or legs. The graphics are dreadful, the sound is mostly screeches and ghostly wailing, and enemies have a habit of appearing directly in front of you at the worst possible moment. But underneath all that is a surprisingly enjoyable little arcade adventure. Part Pac-Man, part Wizard of War, kind of, and part low-budget robbery simulator. Zzap called it the worst program they had seen on the C64, and gave it 9%. That is far too harsh. It may look and sound pretty shite, but it is playable, oddly addictive, and packed with more ideas than plenty of better-looking games. Surely, I'm not alone here. Who else actually enjoyed Cops and Robbers? At number 7 is Lee Enfield in the Tournament of Death, developed and published by Infogrames in 1988. It was actually the British version of Bob Moran, Chivalry, with the hero renamed Lee Enfield, presumably after the rifle, because nothing else here makes much sense. Lee enters Count Savoy's castle to recover the Holy Shroud, punching soldiers, guards and bears while searching for useful objects. Unfortunately, the playing area is tiny, the controls are dreadful, and combat consists mainly of thrashing the joystick from side to side until either Lee or your patience gives up. The intro music from Charles Kelly really kicks, which briefly tricks you into expecting a decent game. It's all downhill from there. I thought the other Lee Enfield game, Space Ace from Infogrames, was pretty bad, also strangely known as Bob Moran, science fiction. But even that was more playable than this. This may be the worst game in the entire Lee Enfield series, which sounds pretty impressive until you discover there were only 2 of them. Zzap gave it 8%, including just 3% for lastability. Julian Rignall later called it the worst game he had ever reviewed, and after playing it, I don't blame him. At number 6 is Strike, released by Mastertronic on its Mad label in 1987 and developed by Binary Design. with music from Jason Brook. It's a 10-pin bowling game, although actually throwing the ball is more difficult than knocking down the pins. You must position the bowler, begin the run-up, and release the fire button at exactly the right moment. Get it slightly wrong and the ball dribbles forward, flies through the air, or lands on his foot. At one point, which I didn't manage to record, his hand even appeared to detach and fly down the lane. Whether this is bowling or some previously undiscovered medical condition, I'm not sure. One player reportedly took 10 years to work out how to bowl, although he may have taken several breaks to live the rest of his life during that period. Just wait for these milk bottles to arrive. 3 hours later. The music is decent, but the gameplay is slow, awkward, and needlessly complicated. Throwing a bowling ball should not be the final boss of a bowling game. Zzap awarded it 8%, while world-class leaderboard sat beside it with 94%. Same page, same machine, very different ideas about how a sport should work. Yay, more crap games. At number 5 is Sky Twice, a full-price release published by American Action in 1987 and developed by Voodoo Design. You play an agent, attempting to recapture a planet across 8 horizontally scrolling stages. Unfortunately, he runs constantly. The scrolling interferes with the controls, and the collision detection seems determined to throw you into every hole on the planet. The graphics are decent, and the music isn't that bad, but none of that matters when every jump ends with you falling to your death. After 5 minutes, I was no longer trying to save the planet, I was just trying to clear one bloody gap. Zzap called it frustrating, unrewarding, and vastly overpriced, awarding just 7%. Sky Twice? Playing this crap once was bad enough, never mind twice. The fact they released it at full price is almost more impressive than the game itself. And yes, this appeared on the same page as Inspector Gadget, which scored 9%. They were definitely using this page to empty the bins. From Strike at number 6, we have Striker at number 4. A £2.99 budget release published by Cult Games in 1990. Cult. Best put my teeth in before attempting that sentence again. This tried to combine football management with arcade action, although calling either part fully developed would be generous. Your options are basically transfers, training, or playing a match. Load a saved game? Yeah, right. During matches, you don't actually control a footballer. You wait for a shooting opportunity. Watch a direction meter move across the screen and press S at the right moment. That's your lot. Meanwhile, the goalkeeper stands practically glued to the spot, and occasionally falls left or right when he remembers he is supposed to be playing. Most of the match is spent watching the clock tick down, presumably while the football is taking place somewhere else. Scoring provides a small amount of satisfaction, but it becomes stale very quickly, and by 1990 we expected considerably more from a football game. Zzap called it the early frontrunner for Turkey of the Year, and awarded just 5%. Ah, a flight simulator. Oh dear. At number 3 is Jet Strike Mission, released by Alpha Omega in 1986 for £4.95. The mission sounds impressive enough. Take off in a fighter bomber, climb to the correct altitude, select your weapons, destroy the target, and return safely to base. Unfortunately, getting the plane off the ground feels like the first major boss battle. The controls are needlessly complicated. The aircraft handles like it had already been shot down, and the graphics look less like a cockpit and more like somebody has tipped a keyboard onto the screen. Once you are finally airborne, there is very little satisfaction in actually flying the thing. Zzap joked that the cassette tape had more depth than the game, awarding 3% for lastability, 4% for value, and just 4% overall. The same issue also gave Video Poker only 11%, which bothers me far more because I loved that game as a kid. Surely I wasn't the only one wasting hours on it. As for Jet Strike Mission, awkward controls, barely any depth, and a cockpit made for spare punctuation marks. Nice flaps though. At number 2 is The Further Adventures of Alice in Videoland, sold as a £2.99 bug-bite budget release. It was coded and drawn by Keith Priestley, with music by Peter James. And yes, it really was commercially released, although calling it a complete game would be taking liberties. The cassette appears to contain the first level frozen from a disc version. Everything works for roughly 4 minutes until the game attempts to load the next stage from a disc drive, which is a slight problem when you have bought it on tape. It then crashes and resets. Congratulations, you have completed the entire retail experience. Screenshots on the packaging suggest that more levels once existed, but the full version was apparently never released and has yet to surface. Customers therefore paid £2.99 for what was effectively an incomplete preview that could not progress beyond level 1. To confuse matters further, the packaging simply called it Alice in Videoland, despite this supposedly being the further adventures. Perhaps the original adventure was trying to get your money back. Zzap awarded it just 3%, and barely bothered with a write-up. But when the game gives up after 4 minutes, what else was there to say? And taking our unofficial Zzap 64 wooden spoon is Robobolt, published by Alpha Amiga in 1986 and written by Gary Leach. You guide a robot around a contaminated spaceport, collecting 4 death pods in the correct order before assembling them and dealing with a space virus. It sounds far more exciting than anything that actually happens. The robot moves painfully slow, the bullets are barely any quicker, and the enemies appear to have been ordered in bulk from the same catalogue. Meanwhile, both your time and radiation are constantly running out, just in case the crushing boredom was not irritating enough. Some of you received Robobolt free with Gods and Heroes, and still felt ripped off. That takes some doing. It's often regarded as the worst commercially released game on the Commodore 64, although it does have one use. Play it first, and whatever you load afterwards will feel like a gold medal winner.
That lovely?
Zzap awarded 2% for lastability, 5% for value, and just 3% overall, stating that games could barely get any worse. In the same issue, Mad Nurse received 32%, and beside Robobolt, that suddenly looked like a sizzler. And there we have it, the 20 lowest scoring Commodore 64 games ever reviewed by Zzap 64, with Robobolt taking the entirely unofficial wooden spoon. It was painful to play these games, trust me, yet review scores are always subjective, and there were definitely a few here I thought deserved considerably more credit. So which score did you agree with most? Which game was treated unfairly, and is there anything even worse that somehow escaped the list? Let me know below, and for the other side of Zzap 64, check out my year-by-year videos covering every Sizzler, Silver Medal and Gold Medal from 1985 onwards. Thanks for watching guys, leave a like if you enjoyed the countdown, subscribe for more Commodore videos, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, bye for now.